I'm 78 now, and I've spent the last few weeks sitting alone in the kitchen while the house settles around me, listening to the ticking of the old wall clock that never seemed to hurry when I was younger. The ticking has become a reminder that the minutes I once thought were endless are slipping away, and there's a weight in my chest that's been growing for years, something I finally understand as the sum of all the small moments I let slip through my fingers while I chased a version of success that never felt like enough. I'm not sitting here to make anyone feel better about their own choices. I'm speaking to you because the story is mine, and the truth of it is all I have left to offer. I have no one else to tell it to. The phone calls have stopped, the letters have faded, and the faces I once knew are either gone or far beyond my reach. So I'll speak plainly, as if I were talking to a neighbor who stopped by for a cup of tea and stayed a little longer because the conversation felt necessary. When I was in my early 20s, fresh out of college with a degree in business administration, I thought the world was a place where ambition was the only currency that mattered. My father had owned a small hardware store in town, and I remember the evenings we'd sit on the porch, the summer heat pressing down, and he'd talk about the value of hard work, of paying your debts, of keeping your word. He never said anything about making it in the way the magazines on my college campus defined it. He said, "A man's worth is measured by the people who trust him." At the time, I heard those words, but I heard them through a filter of what I thought my future should look like. I took a job at a regional sales firm right after graduation. The first week, I was eager, staying late, taking on extra accounts, learning the names of every client's spouse, their children's birthdays, the little details that made a sale feel personal. I thought I was building relationships, but in truth I was building a ledger of contacts, a spreadsheet of numbers that would prove my worth to the next manager, the next promotion, the next raise. My mother, who lived just a few blocks away, would call every Sunday to ask how my week went. I'd answer, "Busy, Mom, busy," and hang up before she could ask if I'd had dinner. I told myself that I was doing it for the family, that the extra hours, the weekend trips to meet a client in another city, the missed birthdays, were all investments. I imagined a future where I could finally sit at the kitchen table with my own children, where I could give them the stability I thought my father had given me. In my 30s, the promotions came. I was a regional manager by 37, a title that came with a corner office, a larger car, and a nameplate that read John M. Carter, Vice President. The office had a view of the city skyline, and from that window I could see the river winding through the streets, the same river I used to cross on a wooden footbridge as a boy, holding my father's hand. I thought about that bridge sometimes, but the view from my office was a different kind of horizon, one that stretched toward quarterly targets and market shares. My wife, Elaine, was a teacher. She loved children, loved the quiet moments after school when she could sit on the porch and watch the sunset. When we married, we promised each other that we'd make time for the things that mattered. In the first few years, we kept that promise. We'd have dinner together, we'd take weekend trips to the lake, we'd read books side by side. But as my responsibilities grew, the dinners became quick meals at my desk, the trips turned into business trips, and the books were left on the nightstand unopened. I remember one night, after a particularly long trip to a conference in Chicago, I came home at 3 a.m. The house was dark, the kids were asleep, and Elaine was sitting at the kitchen table, a cup of tea cooling in her hands. She looked up, her eyes tired, and said, "John, you're home. That's all I ever ask." I smiled, told her I was exhausted, and went straight to my bedroom, leaving the tea untouched. She didn't say anything else. She didn't ask why I was always gone, why the phone calls were brief, why the birthday cards I sent were always late. She just let the silence settle like dust on the countertop. The years kept moving forward, and the milestones I thought would bring fulfillment kept arriving like check marks on a list. My son, Michael, graduated from college, got a job in a city a few hours away, and I was proud. I sent him a watch for his birthday, a watch that I had saved for years to buy, thinking it would be a symbol of my success, a token of my love. He thanked me, but the conversation ended quickly, and we didn't talk for weeks after that. My daughter Sarah married and moved to another state. I sent her a framed photograph of the house we grew up in, hoping it would remind her of home. She replied with a polite, "Thank you," and then the messages stopped. I kept telling myself that the money I earned, the status I achieved, would eventually translate into security for my family. I thought that once I retired, I could finally be present. I imagined a future where I would sit on the porch with Elaine, watching the sunset, where Michael and Sarah would come home for holidays, where the grandchildren would fill the house with laughter. I never stopped to consider that the years I was spending on the road, in meetings, in the glow of a laptop screen, were the very years that could have been spent building those moments. When I turned 45, I was at the peak of my career. I had a corner office, a company car, a bonus that could buy a small house on the coast. I was invited to speak at an industry conference, and I spent a week traveling, delivering speeches about leadership and growth. After the last speech, I stood on a stage in front of 100 people and felt a strange emptiness. The applause was loud, but it didn't fill the space inside me. I thought perhaps this is what I've been working toward: recognition, validation. I left the stage, boarded a plane, and headed home, where the house was quiet, the lights off, and the kitchen empty. That night I found Elaine sitting on the couch, a blanket over her shoulders, her eyes fixed on a photo album. She turned the pages slowly, stopping at a picture of us on our wedding day, smiling, arms around each other. She looked up at me, and for the first time in years, she asked, "Do you remember this?" I nodded, but the memory felt distant, like a scene from a movie I'd watched once. She whispered, "I miss us," and the words hung in the room, heavy and unspoken. I didn't know how to answer. I had spent so long preparing for board meetings, for quarterly reports, that I didn't have a script for this moment. I said, "I'm sorry," and that was all. The apology felt inadequate, like a bandage on a wound that had been festering for decades. The slow erosion of our relationship didn't happen in a single instant. It was the accumulation of missed birthdays, the habit of checking my watch instead of listening to a child's story, the habit of postponing a conversation because later always seemed farther away. It was the small decisions: choosing to stay late at the office instead of staying late at home, choosing a promotion over a family dinner, choosing a new client over a school play. Each choice seemed reasonable at the time. Each choice was justified by the promise of a better future, a better life, a better security. But the future never arrived in the way I imagined. It arrived as a series of empty rooms, a quiet house, a phone that rang only with the sound of a voicemail. The cost became undeniable when Elaine fell ill. It was a slow decline, a diagnosis of heart disease that required medication, regular checkups, and eventually a hospital stay. I remember sitting by her bedside, the beeping of the monitor a steady rhythm that matched the ticking of the clock in my kitchen. I held her hand, and she squeezed back weakly, as if trying to tell me something I couldn't hear. In those moments, the years of missed conversations, the unasked questions, the unshared meals, all came back to me in a rush. I realized that the success I had chased had built a wall between us, a wall that now stood between me and the chance to say the things I needed to say before it was too late. When Elaine passed, the house felt suddenly larger, the silence louder. The photographs on the mantel seemed to stare back, each one a reminder of a moment I had been present for, but not truly present. The children came for the funeral, their faces drawn, their eyes reflecting a mixture of grief and something else, perhaps a quiet disappointment that they had never known their mother as the woman she had been before the years of my absence. After the funeral, I walked through the empty rooms, touching the backs of chairs, the edges of the kitchen table, the worn spot on the couch where Elaine used to sit. I thought about the watch I had given Michael, the photograph I had sent to Sarah, the speeches I had delivered about leadership. I wondered if any of those things mattered now,